Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Ahlan wa sahlan. A warm welcome to Muslima Insight, your show for moral regeneration and spiritual reformation to unite the Ummah. Today in Muslima Insight, we've got an eloquent young guest who is the author of the book called To Find a Bride. As I understand, this book started off on Facebook, and as it is today, it has got close to 750,000 readers. Subsequent to that, the brother Muhammad Ismail have resorted to actually print a hard copy of the book as well. We wish to extend a warm welcome and Assalamu alaikum, brother Ismail.
Wa alaikum assalam. It's only a pleasure being here. I should thank you for the opportunity for having me on your show. Jazakallah for that.
It's an absolute pleasure, brother. Brother Ismail, I'm sure we all are very intrigued and very excited to find out more about this book, To Find a Bride. But before we tap into that information, can you tell us a little bit more about the person Muhammad Ismail?
First of all, I'd describe myself as a curious being, the type of a person that would question everything everywhere. Not just the superficial that you see, but everything as well. I mean, I'd look at the color, I'd think, why would you use this color type of set, for instance? I'd look at the things that you're wearing, I'd wonder, why did you wear that? And because of my curiosity, and based on the fact that I came from an Indian background, you know, we are absolutely perfect when it has to come to gossip. So based on that, growing up in Indian home, etc., I've realized that I might as well take this particular talent and use it to my advantage. I then went forth and I studied journalism, and because of my love for English, my love for literature, I took that so much more further. And instead of doing anything other than that, I decided to put my ideas in writing. Began on Mixit. From Mixit, it went on to Facebook, where people will put up status messages, 1 line, 2 lines. I'd put up essays, only because I had so much to say. Forgive me, I might just speak way too much, but this is me in a nutshell.
Alhamdulillah. And tell me, growing up, you mentioned some of that in your book. Do you mind sharing that with us?
Of course, not a problem. The book is what I may call 70% fact and 30% fiction. The fiction is the hilarious bit. So for the 70% you have to get through the 30% of hilarity, it's worth it. Now, in the same light, my life is like that. I've grown up in a small little town on the outskirts of Alberton, and because of that, growing up in this particular town, everyone knew everyone. So because of that, there was a lot of public pressure, a lot of keeping the family name and everything of the sort. So due to that, we needed to go through things in a very different light. Of course, my mother being my mother and having an elder brother, it was always a competition between the two of us to ensure that we excelled to levels that we didn't deem possible. I mean, I have a little brother now who has slackened drastically in comparison to the manner in which our parents raised us. So in the same light, when you have to look at it in that way, my upbringing was one of staunch recognition, not just of religion, not just of social economics, not just of the community alone, but rather of mental equity, of looking at things beyond the way that you normally see them. 2 + 2 is 4. But why is it 4? How would 4 be able to help you in life later on? And that's what we always learned. And that's the easiest way to even state my method of growing up.
And would you say that is relevant to most of the other Muslim families that you would find in the community in your day and age growing up?
Honestly, no, I cannot necessarily state that. Whilst my parents focused on religion as well as intellectual commodities, like I told you, everything is pushed towards the intellectual. My mother always ensured that we went and did our level best whenever it came to anything at all. So because of that, we have obviously excelled further than anyone in our localities or anything of the sort, and went further like that. Of course, I cannot give any references to how the upbringing of other people were, but from my upbringing, I can state full well that my parents have done a pretty good job.
Alhamdulillah, alhamdulillah. Brother, coming to the topic, To Find a Bride, how did this start for you?
I was young. Well, I'm still young, but anyway, it began like this. We decided that, I decided that I'm going to tell a little story on Facebook. So I decided to start it off with the usual, you go to a wedding, you look at a girl, etc. But I thought, how could I give this a twist? Add the humor, add certain characteristics to the girl, add the reactions of the guy. And being someone who has qualified in journalism, etc., I have this knack when it comes to words. And of course, when you write it, it becomes so much more beautiful. And in the same light, I decided to put up the first chapter of this particular book in a bit of a joke online. And when I decided to do that, the response was phenomenal. People that I didn't know decided to add me as a friend and whatever else, only because they wanted to read that. And not only that, but the comments as well, because the comments can be just as hilarious.
And do you think some of that that you have written hit home? It hit the nail on the head pertaining to their own lives, what they were facing?
Of course. I mean, there are so many people that decided to share their stories with me because it's a 400-page novel, and I can assure you that most of that did not necessarily happen to me. Now, with regards to the book, what I went about with was the fact that I went to a person, asked them what their life was like. Like, I'd probably come to you, Sister Adila, tell me, how did you meet your husband? Or I'd go to your husband and ask him. His version will be very different. He'll probably say something like, hey, man, I was at this wedding, and when I saw her, she was like the most beautiful woman in the room, and I knew I need to find out about her. But my connections were watching. I was shy. How was I going to do this? So the first thing I did, being a wedding, I spoke to someone, and they spoke to someone, and next thing you knew, I'm going on this thing called a samosa run. Of course, we'll touch on samosa runs a bit later. But every person has a different story.
Sure.
But that doesn't necessarily mean that every story is true. You need to be able to tell who's not being as truthful as everyone else. Because in the end, everyone likes to hyperbolize everything that they say.
And that's part of the human nature.
Of course, exaggeration. In Indian people, in exaggeration, ooh.
Exactly. Brother, you've mentioned the samosa run. Can you elaborate, for the sake of our viewers that haven't read the book, what exactly is a samosa run?
Musical chairs.
Okay.
A samosa run entails this. Let's say, for instance, a guy is interested in a particular female. Or we'll be more realistic here. The mother would find out from a certain auntie that a particular female in the community is available for matrimony. She has reached the stage of marriage. We're looking at 19, 20, 21, 22, 23. By 23, it kind of cuts off. But we'll get to that a bit later. So when they find out that this particular woman is in this age gap, they play this game of broken telephone, where one person would phone another person and that person would phone someone else. And before you know it, the conversation returns to the original two, the mother and the son. And the mother would tell the son, you know what, Muhammad, I've met this particular female. Her name is Fatima. She's related to, and then they'll give you this family tree, how this person is related to whoever it may be. And I assure you, it's not so much a tree, but a forest.
Sure.
So anyway, we go about this entire long journey of finding out who this person is. The guy doesn't remember anything by the time he goes to see the girl. And then a meeting is set. Now, the meeting is set between two different parties. The male side, the boy's side, and the female side, the girl's side. And they decide to either Saturday or a Sunday or whichever day is convenient for them, the boy goes home. Now, the reason they call it samosa run is because she must serve samosas. You know those triangular pieces of goodness? Before I get distracted on samosas now. So this is what happens. As they're seated there, the boy looks at the girl looks at the boy. To be quite honest, it's based mainly on the facade of beauty. Because, of course, the boy and the girl are given their period of time to speak to each other, which is between 10 to 15 minutes alone. Sometimes it can exceed that amount, but never more than an hour. Now, my question came about in that light. How can you ever get to know a person in that period of time?
Sure.
Of course, when I asked my mother this question, she told me it's all about knowing what the family is like. If the family is good, the kids would be good. But in today's time, you can't necessarily trust that. I know I'm very different from my parents. My parents are very different from me. They have brought us up in very different lights. Now, in the same light, you might come from a very pious home, but the child will be rebellious. And vice versa. You know, the home could be falling apart, but the child could have attained a new level of taqwa, a new level of patience only because she has lived with that. So in the same light, you spend those 15 minutes, 20 minutes, you have looked at her, you find her beautiful, you go forth and you read your istikhara. But the thing is, the main point of a samosa run, what I can say from my honest opinion, is that it's based on a facade of beauty. What the eye sees, the eye desires. And
the putting forward of the best foot, because that is what a person is going to naturally do.
If someone's going to come to see you, you're obviously going to do as much as you can. You're going to dress in your best attire. You're going to put as much makeup as you can. And come the wedding night, he sees a different person altogether. He's like, hi, who are you?
Exactly. Yes. And tell me, what are some of the experiences that you've written in the book that you would like to share with us?
Well, first of all, I've learned the new definition of the Indian term, mashallah. Of course, it's an Arabic term, which, you know, speaks about Allah bestowing goodness on a person. However, in the Indian tradition, because I'm going to use a lot of stereotypes based on the fact that I wrote it from an Indian mentality, mashallah means fat. I know I'm being politically incorrect, but honestly, that's what it means. I mean, there was this one auntie, I'll tell you this. And what happened was this. She said that there's this absolutely beautiful girl, etc. And she said she's mashallah. I don't know whether my mother missed the look of the manner in which that this lady said mashallah, because apparently this gesture means heavy.
Heavy, well-built, well-fit.
Exactly. And looking at my size, etc., we decided to go and see this girl. I didn't know about any of this.
Unfortunately, brother, it is time for us to take a short break. We're going to
continue.
Absolutely. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. A warm welcome back to Muslima Insight. Today in Muslima Insight, we've got the author of the book called To Find a Bride, Muhammad Ismail. Muhammad, before the break, you were starting to expound for us on one of the experiences you have come across with regards to the samosa run. Can you just carry on with your story?
Of course, of course. I'd start off with this particular line. It is said that when you fall in love, you need to sweep a woman off her feet. But if she's double your size, do you break your back? So in the same light, I'm not necessarily picking on the fact of weight or anything of the sort, but rather the ideas that people have behind it. Like, for instance, in the same category, what I speak about in the book is about this particular auntie has seen the groom, the potential groom, when he was much younger. Of course, at that point, he was probably chubby or something of the sort. And from what she remembers, when he was 4, maybe 5, she decides to line up a bride accordingly. So when that occurs, like I said in the beginning, she describes this girl as mashallah. And she uses this gesture. And then, of course, you decide, you go home and you go and see this particular female, only to find out that, wow, that's, 2.5 versions of you. And you don't even eat that much.
Okay.
So it's all about that. It's all about the ideas that people have behind the stereotypes that come with it. And of course, you learn all of these different things and whatever else it may be. I mean, I remember sitting in the lounge and looking at this particular set of shelves. Well, cabinets, if you may call it. And in it, there was so much of cutlery. I mean, they have this traditional Indian plates and platters and whatever else. And my query is this: when they do bring the food, do I go to the cabinet, open it and take it out, only to realize they're a whole different set of material to eat on? But of course, it's all the different things that you see as you go along this particular journey. It's not necessarily the one thing that you would see everywhere, but certain things that you would see and be able to relate to in various different ways. I think that the main thing with regards to the samosa run is that it's a facade. And more often than not, based on the way that we are exposed to media, we are exposed to the internet, we're not necessarily the same people we were when we were beginning, and nor will we be the same people that we are after we're done with the web. So in the same light, you need to get to know a person in a lot more in-depth manner, especially in today's time.
And almost in a more informal setting, one can almost say.
Of course. I mean, you can never know a person if you're stressed out. If you're nervous, if you're shy, because at that moment, hi, how are you? I'm okay, and you? That's not going to work.
It's almost abnormal.
Of course.
Because there's no spontaneity, there's no being natural, being at ease, being yourself.
And you're going to spend the next millennium, you're going to spend the next 50 years with this particular person. The question is this. Do you really want someone who, when asking her wants to eat, giggles at you and tells you, I'm okay?
Yeah, exactly.
I'd die of hunger.
Exactly. Brother, beyond the samosa run, you also mentioned some other methods that young men embark on to then find their ideal bride.
Okay, where do I begin here? There's a zoo lake. On Eid Day especially. I mean, you get to see the entire Lodium there. And Lodium is from Pretoria, so for them to come there, it's a journey. And with petrol price today, woo! But anyway, there's various different methods where you'd obviously walk up to a woman and whatever else. Of course, none of that is feasible based on the fact of zina and whatever else it may be. However, when you do look at it, people have come across many, many different facets. I mean, even you have to look at Sunnah, etc. Nabi sallallahu alayhi wa sallam met his first bride, Hazrat Khadija radiallahu anha, through business. Now, in the same light, you look at all of these various methods that you can, from shopping malls, from looking at someone at a wedding, from samosa runs, from finding out via various different people. Even now with the shadi.com websites, I mean, they have so many different types, SA Nikah and all of these various Facebook pages that literally hook one another up. They, of course, they claim that it's done in a halal manner, of course, but the intentions of the man and woman can never ever be truly dictated, can never be truly understood, can never be truly looked at from an administration point of view, because only that person knows what his intentions are. So, of course, you can go ahead, see someone beautiful and approach them, or approach their mahram for that instance. But the thing is, are you only going for the superficial characteristics, or is there more behind that?
On that note, I want to ask you, what are some of the lessons that you have learned in these different approaches?
As an author, I'd state, don't judge a book by its cover, but my cover is actually quite nice. But based on that, I'm being conceited, forgive me. But based on that, in the same lights, many different versions, what I see is the heart desires. The question is being able to see beyond that. Because, like they said, a pretty wife is everyone's wife. That's what they normally state. Now, the question is, if you're looking at her in a lustful manner, etc., are those your only intentions? Because in the end, the lust is only going to last for that period of time. What occurs after that? Can she cook? Can she run a home? The question is, can you cook? Can you run a home? Based on the male categories. I mean, based on the fact that there are so many working women, etc., in today's time, it becomes feasible for the man himself to learn how to take care of himself before he can take care of anyone else. So in the same light, all of the different things that you look at, you don't necessarily look at one attribute, but how all of these attributes come together to create perfection or close to perfection for you. So in the same light, whilst you might think that you only want beauty, the question you need to ask yourself is this: if you want beauty, if you want someone absolutely stunning, is it because you want her to make you look good, or
is she the piece on your arm to build your esteem, or are you going to work on yourself to have self-esteem?
And in the end, even if you do choose someone of beauty, I'm going to pick on beauty quite a bit here. Even if you decide that you're going to choose someone of beauty, the question is this: when you're walking through a mall or whatever else, are you going to force her into parda? Are you going to force her into niqab, knowing the fact that it's sunnah and not necessarily farda? Are you going to put her into niqab only because of your green monster, of that envy coming on, because you're afraid of who's looking at her? Based on the fact that from the very beginning, the only thing that attracted you to her was her beauty. And if it's going to be covered up, etc., when she's going to come home, she's going to want to relax, unwind, and she's not going to be as beautiful as you know her to be. Of course, you're going to look at character, conversation, etc., because it's going to be problematic if you're going to have someone that you can't even have a conversation with.
There needs to be some link, personality-wise, character-wise, because surely also the other concept with regards to beauty is that we all age. and a woman has children, and the body changes, but so too the men also age, and the man's body also changes, but yet the initial intention for marrying was the beauty. What happens then when, as the woman ages? Do you think young men take that into consideration?
Well, this is for those who haven't read my book as yet, those who are married. If you want a second bride, go ahead. But anyway, based on that, in terms of beauty and the superficial characteristics behind it, in terms of character, you might find someone who is amazing in terms of conversation, but yet their temper is detrimental. You'd find someone who is absolutely patient, but even patience has limits. You need to find someone that you would be able to have a discussion with, someone that you can agree with, someone that you can disagree with, someone that can tell you, you know what, I believe that you do have a point, however, you need to look at it from my point of view, someone open-minded. And in the same light, it's not necessarily us looking for these traits, but us instilling these traits in us. Because it is said that you will attract that what you are.
Exactly. And also what I've learned in my couples coaching is that the Prophet ﷺ said that each of you is a mirror to the other. And effectively, as we sit here, you can't see your own face. But now imagine in your relationship with your spouse, that is the person that is going to press your buttons. It is those parts of you that you cannot see that that person is going to highlight. And do you think youngsters, when they embarking on this journey, are even aware of when you're choosing that bride, it's going to be a life partner that you're going to embark on completing half your religion?
I highly doubt it, because as a youngster, when I was growing up, the only thing that actually mattered was, to be quite honest, it was all about the figure, it was all about the face, it was all about her voice, you know, all of those particular little nitty-gritty things that don't necessarily mean much in the long run. Of course, now people listening to me now might think, but beauty can be everything. The thing is, it's not everything. Yes, there should be a bit of beauty. I mean,
there must be a physical attraction,
of course,
at least.
there has to be that attraction, because in the end, I'm not saying look for someone that's, you know, completely, you know, absolutely hideous to you. Of course, no one is exactly hideous, but each of us are born with different likes, different dislikes, different aspects like that. So in the same light, if you have to look for someone that fills your category, not just of beauty, etc., you need to understand that your kids are going to have traits like yours and your wives. And as I was once stating, I said this much earlier, even before the show, school kids can be mean. And if that kid has to look weird because of the combination of those two categories, those kids would have a field day with them. And we don't want to put the kids through emotional trauma like that, because that will lead to low self-esteem, etc. So you need to think of the long run. Don't think just of the now. Don't just think of the 10 years, but think of the time when the kids do come and when the grandkids do come. What models, what support, what are the various attributes that you're going to leave behind for them.
Jazakallah, brother. It's time once again for us to go to a short break. Don't go away. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. A warm welcome back to Muslima Insight. Brother Ismail, before the break, you were touching on the topic of children, and the cruelest of cruelty happens among children as we grow up, on outer facades, on how children look, various comments, and yet it actually goes back to how you bring up your child as well. You were touching on morals and values. What would you say can positively contribute to society?
Honestly, it's to stop looking at the superficial, to look at more than that, to look at a person for who they are, what they can really bring to the table. Because more often than not, you'd find someone who is beautiful yet has disgusting character. And they don't come across as beautiful anymore. You might find someone who in society's eyes may seem ordinary, may seem average, and yet their character can be of such amazement that it changes your entire perception of them, and you start to see beauty in them. So in the same light, you'd look at people that can make you laugh, people that can make you think, things like that. You would rather spend your time with them rather than someone who's reaching for a mirror every few seconds. And this is the narcissistic tendencies that you tend to see. And it's not only prevalent in females, but in males as well. But I do believe that this goes back to the stereotypes that we are brought up with. No one will marry you if your rotis aren't round. Well, that's what they state. I mean, you're going to eat the thing. My rotis look like Australia. Sometimes they look like Africa. But, well, I consider it a world map, a learning experience. So in the same light, that alone is a stereotype. If we have to cut stereotypes out of our lives, if we have to look at things in very different manners, if we have to look at depth, if we have to look at so much more than just what meets the eye.
The character of the person, in essence.
You look at reason rather than reaction. Because everything that a person does is only due to some reaction prior to that. There has to be a reason for particular behaviors. And if you can start understanding the reasons, you would start understanding the person. Because there's no way someone would be mean to you just because of the fact of being mean. We as humans are known to be open beings. So much so you walk in a mall and someone has to smile at you, automatically you're going to smile back. In the same light, in traffic, someone has to flip you off. It's going to spoil your day. It's the different interactions that we have. They state that you should always look for a smile, and if you can't find one, be that smile.
Sure.
And that's what I look at. So if our parents could instill these practices in us from young, of course, my parents have done a fabulous job regarding that. If they can instill these particular practices in us from young, it becomes habitual later on.
I want to just come in and just ask you, would you say that a lot of what you exude from inside to the outer, it's not only the confidence, it's got a lot to do with self-love? Would you say it goes back, because you mentioned about stereotyping and looking at the South African landscape, looking at the fact that our prior generations lived through the era of apartheid, the ill conditioning that took place, the breaking down of the self-esteem, of the self-concept, and that the adults of that era then had to raise their children. And you know, there's the saying of, if you're a warped mirror, you're going to raise a warped mirror, you know, because the child looks at the parent as a reflection. And obviously our older generations sit with this. How can we break through this barrier so that we come to realize that true beauty is in the eye of the beholder? Some may find fair skin attractive. I personally find olive skin attractive. Now, this is where it comes in for me personally, is beauty is in the eye of the beholder. And surely if you take any sculptor that sculpts a statue, for that artist that created that is the most beautiful item. Now, surely, if we take it back that Allah Ta'ala created us, we should be worried if He likes us. And that's where our confidence should lie. How else do you think parents can start instilling in their children the love for self, the acceptance of self?
Every person has something to learn from someone else. My father can speak an approximate of 10 different languages, not only anything that's based in Indian mentality, but also those of South African mentality. He can speak Zulu, Sotho, Xhosa, Afrikaans, Urdu, Gujarati, English. And it's all of these various languages that whenever I question, Dad, why do you speak this way? He said that when you speak to someone, these of course were the words of Nelson Mandela, when you speak to someone and you speak to them in your tongue, they will listen to you with their mind. You speak to them in their tongue, and they will listen to you with their heart.
Sure.
So we grew up, of course, my parents just came out of the apartheid era, etc. So there was this hierarchy of supremacy. Of course, blacks being at the bottom, coloreds, Indians, whites, or however the table may go. The thing is, my parents always stated that we should treat people the way that we want to be treated, regardless of their skin color. I never understood this. I always thought, but you know what? We Indian, we're supposed to be superior in some light. Until one day, I don't know whether or not it was a lesson or something of the sort, I was left with the gardener for a while. And sitting with the gardener, of course, him being black, me having this idea of superiority, etc. And I saw him planting in a certain way. Digging in a certain way, putting the seeds in a certain way. Now, I've never had a green thumb. I've never really, whatever I've tried to plant died. Could be my touch, but yeah. Anyway, whenever he planted something, it would grow. So I decided I'm going to ask him, how does he do this? So he started to tell me in broken English how it needs to be in a certain ratio, so much of sand, so much of water, and it made phenomenal sense to a point that I learned something from someone I thought that was below me. And immediately I started to realize that so many different things could come along, so many different things I could learn from people just from opening up my bubble. So in the same light, sitting with this man, I started to spend a lot of time with him. He would tell me all of the different things, like the best time to plant would be just before the sun is to set. And I never understood why. So he would tell me that the ground would be warm and it needs to cool during the night whilst the water seeps in. Of course, he would tell me all of this in broken English. Now, before this, I used to think that someone who speaks in broken English is not necessarily intelligent. Of course, stereotypically, that's how I looked at it. Only to realize that when this guy spoke Zulu, he was absolutely eloquent. And I could not speak his language. If I had to learn his language, even in the beginning phases, the first year, 2 years, 5 years, even down the line, I would speak in a broken manner. So just because he cannot speak in my tongue does not make him stupid. Exactly. Me not being able to see that makes me stupid. And of course, I needed to start learning how to deal with all of these things in various different ways. And in the same way, my parents have encouraged it. My best friends were never based on certain skin colors, were never based on certain heights, etc. I mean, I'm absolutely short. Thanks, Mom. But because of that, we never had this social class that we needed to fill in. We would mix with the rich, we would mix with the poor, we would never really care. My parents never told us that we have X amount, or you need to be in a certain class, you need to act in a certain way. They taught us about chivalry, they taught us how to respect a person, how never to use vulgar words or anything of the sort. They taught us to use our words, but they never taught us to use our words to exert superiority on anyone.
Fantastic.
And like that, I've learned so much more from everyone else, not just from our own race group, not just from our own skin color group, not just from our own religious group. And because of that, I believe that I've become a very open-minded person, only because my parents decided to do things differently.
And I think also it opened your mind. You know, instead of just going through this tunnel vision through life, but it's really expanded your vision, and that's really where a lot of information and intelligence then came in. Brother, just to take it a few steps back, we touched on stereotyping. Would you say within the Indian Muslim communities, because of the apartheid regime and what has happened, the conditioning then came that the name brand shoes or the name brand clothes or the flashy car, so that they could feel better from within?
Of course. I mean, it is always stated that the rich remain rich because they live like the poor. The poor remain poor because they want to live as though they are rich. So in the end, no one's really going to know unless they have to look at that little logo on your shirt, if they have to look at that little name brand or whatever else it may be, that would say that, you know what, this is absolutely pricey. I mean, I'm Indian. I'd rather buy 10 of the same thing from China Mart and get away with it. I'd still have the logo. But the thing is this, that we have this idea that material possessions give us self-worth, forgetting that our intellect is what gives us self-worth.
Your character.
Every person has it. And if you're able to enhance that, you can enhance everything around you. In the same way, we look at things where a person would take a whole lot of newspapers and keep it into his house. We think he's a madman. So why is it that when someone has to take so much of money that he could use, obviously on the people around him, etc., and he has to hoard it away, we look at them as role models. And if we have to change that mentality and look at the manner in which that we can benefit mankind, we would look at things in a very different light. But of course, people don't necessarily see that because we grow up with this worship of money. You need to respect money. You need to understand what money is like, how much you need it in your life. But money is simply the currency. And that should say a lot.
Jazakallah, brother. It's once again time for us to go to a short break. Don't go away. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. A warm welcome back to Muslima Insight. Brother Ismail, before the break, we were talking about the programming, the conditioning that stems back from apartheid, how it has affected our whole outer being as well as our inner being, and how we would grasp at name brands, money, and we would put our values on almost the wrong items to try to gain self-worth. Now, on that note, I would like to ask you some advice that you would give viewers to veer away and to start overcoming this, what apartheid has done to our psyche.
Treat a person as a person. Forget about the outer look. Because every person has something to offer. Every person has a story to tell. So the next time you look at someone and you're about to judge them, you're about to think of them either as superior or inferior, ask yourself, what is their story? And as soon as you do that, you're already opening yourself up to understanding. You're looking at things of so much more. You're not just looking at the cover, like I said. You look at so much more. You look at the depth behind it. You look at the twists, the turns. Because even if you have to look at it, the multimillionaires of today's time, most of them don't even have MBAs. You look at those who are successful in whatever field that they may be. There are so many people doing the exact same things. The question is, what makes them stand out? What did they do differently? Or even if you have to look at someone who has not stood out in any way, and you have to ask them their story, why is it that you're living this particular life? And they'd tell you about their forefathers, they'd tell you about their kids, they'd tell you about all of the different things, and this person will no more be an object to you, but will be something so much more. There will be a character in this vivid journey of life, and that will be part of your own story.
Jazakallah. And it makes a lot of sense in what you're saying. Coming to a little bit further in your book that you've written, you touched on the topic of the divorcees in society and the stigmatization that especially hangs around the females that get divorced. Can you elaborate for us on that?
Every time you go about life, everything that you do in life, regardless of what you may do, there's the option of succeeding and failing. You see this in school. We grow up with this hierarchy of knowing that you have this opportunity to do as well as you can, or you get this opportunity to repeat, except matrimony. Especially in the Indian community, if you have to look at females, males not so much. Men can still move on after the case of divorce.
Why would you say that?
Because
why is it easier?
When it comes to women, women are always seen as these objects of purity. They have this one option, and to be quite honest, to be quite blatant, if a woman was married before, society looks at her as used goods, regardless of her age, regardless of how long the relationship lasted. Forgetting that even those that have not married before have been in relationships for a month, 2 months, 3 months, a year, 2 years. Some marriages don't even last that long.
And beyond that, the male has also been married.
And there's so much of effort, so much of emphasis placed on the woman and her reputation, even prior to marriage, so much so that the male is not put through so much of a task. A man could be one of the vilest creatures of today's time. But if he has to state, I want to change my life, and he goes in Jamaat, for instance, for a period of 3 months, he comes back, everyone will state, yeah, he was a bad boy, but he changed his life. He's good, he should receive one of the best of women. And they go about that mentality. In the same light, a woman cannot necessarily do that. She cannot simply erase everything of her past. And in the same light, if a marriage fails, no one really goes to the woman and asks her the reason for it. Because in the end, you ask the male, you ask the female, you're going to get different versions from both sides. It's very difficult to tell the truth. It's very difficult to know what really went on. And to judge a person simply by their mistakes goes against the tradition of Sunnah. I mean, if you have to look at the amount of wives that Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam married, that were divorced, that were widowed, that were married before, it says more than enough.
And he didn't regard them as used goods?
Of course. But we see it that way. The question is, why do we see it that way? Is it because of the mentality that we go on from the outbreak of nikah? When you just go forth, you need to look for someone that is of amazing character, decency, etc. But no one really knows what goes on in your mind. I mean, there can be a point where someone can be absolutely calm, peaceful, etc. But with that smile on their face, they must be thinking that they could kill you in 10 different ways. You never really know what's going on in the person's mind. So in the same light, if you're looking at that and that alone, we are forgetting the most important fact, is that often we learn from our mistakes and become better people.
You evolve, you grow, you take the wisdom from that experience.
Indeed, but society has come to such a point that we don't even look at divorced women. It's like you get one shot at marriage. If you screw up, too bad, you know what? Your time's over. No more for you. Forgetting that their life has only begun. You get people that are 21, 22, 23, and they are divorced. Some of them even with kids. I mean, will those kids now grow up without the role model of a father only because of some idiotic reason for divorce? People enter marriage now and get divorced for just as stupid reasons. The question is this, or should I state, what the entire book is based on is that you learn from your mistakes. However, that's only an intelligent man. A wise man learns from the mistakes of others. So that doesn't necessarily mean that you should write a person off based only on their past. Because more often than not, even those that have not been married have a bad past. So look at people as individuals, look at them for the goodness. And of course, like that, the goodness will settle in you as well.
Exactly. And do you think this whole concept of the way divorced women are looked at and trying to break that stigma, do you think it is more prevalent on among the Indian Muslim societies or among Muslims per se?
Honestly, I can tell you that Indians are stereotypical beings. So from the point of stigma, Indians can be harsh. But in terms of divorce, if you have to look at it in an entire category, no man wants to go through a relationship where he comes across the ex and the ex has to say, yeah, you're getting my leftovers. Because in the end, that affects the ego. But if you can treat people and learn to understand in such a way that if you have to go through divorce, you never go to ruin that person's life if they decide to try again. You never have to go through those points, because in the end, a person will only try to make someone feel inferior if they themselves are feeling inferior. So the thing is this, if we can learn to accept ourselves, if we can learn to put all of these traits that we are looking for in us, only then can we exude those facts, and only then can we see it in others. The question remains, if you're looking for the perfect spouse, the question is, are you perfect for that person? And if you can answer that question, then of course, you know that you are as close to ready to marriage that you can be. However, if you have to state, yes, I am perfect, then obviously you have your arrogance to work on.
Exactly. And the other thing in listening to what you were saying is, if we take again the example of Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, his example that he did marry women that were married before, he married women that were widowed, and that says a lot about the character, because you mentioned the word ego. It takes a lot of the ego to go and reach out and say, and that actually makes of him a bigger, better, greater person. To be able to say, no, there's nothing wrong with that person. You know, it is almost like this labeling that society gives people that we need to start ridding ourselves of these habitual patterns. Brother, just to also just come to other parts of the book, the initial few chapters of the book speaks about the young person, the nerdish guy that goes on the samosa run, tries in the malls, etc., and is very romantic. But yet further in the book, it evolves to a much more mature character. Can you elaborate for us on that?
It's useless going through a situation in life and learning nothing from it. Something happens in your life, good or bad, you need to take something from it. Now, what I've noticed, what I usually do is that every night that I go to bed, the first thing that I think about is, what did I do? What did I learn from it? How did I grow from it? So the character in the book might start off as the stereotypical Indian boy. He needs to become a man. How does he become that man? And that's practically what the book is about. It's not so much the journey of finding a bride, but rather the journey of a boy finding himself.
Which is really, really profound. And what are some of the experiences later in the book that you can share with us that makes that youngster evolve into becoming? Because most men at a much later age reach that maturity. And yet, with society, with the information technology that we have, things are happening at a much faster pace, and there's more pressure put on people. What would you say are some of those experiences that that youngster went through so that he could mature much faster?
He went through 4 phases. The first phase being lust. Thought he needs to get married because he needs to curb his lust. So he looked for people that were along those lines. He looked at the beauty, the figure, the appeal, and he thought he needs to curb that. Only to realize that without lust, he needs something more. He needs communication. So the second part comes along, communication. He goes across looking for people that he can communicate with. He speaks to these people, only to realize that not just lust and communication, he needs character as well. So now he goes along this path, realizing now that instead of looking at the 5 years or the 10 years, he's looking 20 years into the future. And he looks at, the character. When it comes to the last point, he realizes that 50 years from now, he needs to be able to state that his kids have been brought up in as great a category as he was. And now he starts to look for wisdom. So by the time he reaches that point of knowing that he needs to find these 4 main categories, not just lust, not just communication, not just character, but wisdom as well. And when he puts all of those things together, as a wise man, he learns that he needs to be this person.
Jazakallah, brother, you have really taken us through a very interesting journey, what males do go through in finding a bride. I thank you for joining us here on set, and I pray and I hope that all our viewers have learned much once again from the insights that the brother has shared. And maybe always remember that as Islam teaches us, you can marry a woman for her beauty, you can marry her for her wealth, but best of all is to marry a woman for her piety. And may we all embark on this journey with true character and with true wisdom to find our ideal partners. From myself, Adila, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.